इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस और यूके के ग्रीन ग्रिड इनिशिएटिव के पहल से एक ठोस रूप मिला है। एक्सेलेंसीज, इंडस्ट्रियल रिवॉल्यूशन को फॉसिल फ्यूल से ऊर्जा दी थी। फॉसिल फ्यूल्स के उपयोग से कई देश तो समृद्ध हुए, किंतु हमारी धरती, हमारा पर्यावरण निर्धन हो गए। फॉसिल फ्यूल्स की होड़ ने जियोपॉलिटिकल तनाव भी खड़े किए, लेकिन आज टेक्नोलॉजी ने हमें एक बेहतरीन विकल्प दिया है। एक्सेलेंसीज, हमारे यहां हजारों वर्ष पूर्व सूर्योपनिषद में कहा गया है, सूर्याद भवन्ति भूतानि सूर्येण पालिताति तू, अर्थात सब कुछ सूर्य से ही उत्पन्न हुआ है, सबकी ऊर्जा का स्रोत सूर्य ही है और सूर्य की ऊर्जा से ही सबका पालन होता है। पृथ्वी पर जब से जीवन उत्पन्न हुआ, तभी से सभी प्राणियों का जीवन चक्र, उनकी दिनचर्या सूर्य के उदय और अस्त से जुड़ी रही है। जब तक यह प्राकृतिक कनेक्शन बना रहा, तब तक हमारा प्लेनेट भी स्वस्थ रहा। लेकिन आधुनिक काल में मनुष्य ने सूर्य द्वारा स्थापित चक्र से आगे निकलने की होड़ में प्राकृतिक संतुलन को डिस्टर्ब किया और अपने पर्यावरण का बड़ा नुकसान भी कर लिया। अगर हमें फिर से प्रकृति के साथ संतुलित जीवन का संबंध स्थापित करना है, तो इसका रास्ता हमारे सूर्य से ही प्रकाशित होगा। मानवता के भविष्य को बचाने के लिए हमें फिर से सूरज के साथ चलना होगा। एक्सेलेंसीज, जितनी ऊर्जा पूरी मानव जाति साल भर में उपयोग करती है, उतनी ऊर्जा सूर्य 1 घंटे में धरती को देता है। और यह अपार ऊर्जा पूरी तरह से क्लीन है, सस्टेनेबल है। चुनौती सिर्फ इतनी है कि सौर ऊर्जा दिन में ही उपलब्ध है और मौसम पर भी निर्भर है। वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड इसी चुनौती का हल है। एक वर्ल्ड वाइड ग्रिड से क्लीन एनर्जी हर जगह, हर समय मिल पाएगी। इससे स्टोरेज की आवश्यकता भी कम होगी और सोलर प्रोजेक्ट्स की वायबिलिटी भी बढ़ेगी। इस रचनात्मक पहल से कार्बन फुटप्रिंट और ऊर्जा की लागत को तो कम होगी ही, अलग अलग क्षेत्रों और देशों के बीच सहयोग का एक नया मार्ग भी खुलेगा। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड और ग्रीन ग्रिड इनिशिएटिव के सामंजस्य से एक संयुक्त और सुदृढ़ वैश्विक ग्रिड का विकास हो पाएगा। मैं आज ये भी जानकारी देना चाहता हूं कि हमारे स्पेस एजेंसी इसरो विश्व को एक सोलर कैलकुलेटर एप्लीकेशन देने जा रही है। इस कैलकुलेटर से सैटेलाइट डेटा के आधार पर विश्व की किसी भी जगह की सोलर पावर पोटेंशियल मापी जा सकेगी। यह एप्लीकेशन सोलर प्रोजेक्ट्स का लोकेशन डिसाइड करने में उपयोगी होगा एवं इससे वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड को भी मजबूती मिलेगी। एक्सेलेंसी, एक बार फिर मैं इंटरनेशनल सोलर अलायंस का अभिनंदन करता हूं और मेरे मित्र बोरिस को उनके सहयोग के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूं। मैं सभी अन्य देश के लीडर्स की उपस्थिति के लिए भी उन सबका हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
The acceleration of global is now more urgent than ever. Harnessing the power of the sun, the Earth's biggest energy source.
Example of international partnership shown in that film. I'm now delighted to introduce President Biden of the United States of America and invite him to speak from the left lectern.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, our overriding purpose here in Glasgow is to raise the ambitions of our commitments to keep within reach our goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But setting ambitious targets is only half of the equation, as you all know. We also have to have concrete plans for how we're going to meet those goals and decarbonize our economies to reach net zero emissions by 2050. To start, state the obvious, we have to immediately scale up clean technologies that are already commercially available and cost competitive, like wind and solar energy. In the United States, we set a goal of deploying 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, creating tens of thousands of good-paying union jobs for American workers, and meeting the power needs of almost 10,000 American homes every year. We can do this now. We don't have to wait. At the same time, we recognize that our current technology alone won't get us where we need to be. So it must also be a decisive decade for innovation, developing, demonstrating, and commercializing new clean energy technologies by 2030 so that they can be widely deployed in time to meet our 2050 net zero goals. Clean hydrogen, long-duration energy storage, next-generation renewables and nuclear, carbon capture, sustainable agriculture, and so much more. We need to invest in breakthroughs, and I welcome the UK's leadership on the Glasgow Breakthrough Agenda. Innovation is the key to unlocking our future. That's why the United States is working to quadruple funding for clean energy research and development over the next 4 years, and will lead a year of action in 2022 to advance clean technologies globally. Over the past 2 days, I've announced several U.S. government-led initiatives to help develop and scale clean energy transmission. But we can't achieve our goals through government action alone. I'm looking at some of the men and women in front of me that can help accelerate and develop clean energy technologies. The United States and the World Economic Forum are launching the First Movers Coalition. So let me explain what the First Movers Coalition is, and I expect you already know. The First Movers Coalition is starting with more than 24 of the world's largest and most innovative companies. The coalition represents 8 major sectors that comprise 30% of the global emissions that we now are dealing with. Steel, shipping, aluminum, concrete, trucking, aviation, chemicals, and direct air capture. These companies will be critical partners in pushing for commercially viable alternatives to decarbonize these industrial sectors and more. And while championing the U.S. innovation of good-paying jobs at the same time, and the U.S. government is going to use our enormous market power as the world's largest buyer of goods and services, some $650 billion in acquisitions annually, to do the same. The government purchases that much. Together, these policies, God willing, will spur a wave of new and better products into the market and new companies and projects that will create good-paying jobs. So we're attacking the challenge from both ends. We're sending the demand signal loud and clear and investing in research and development to expand supply. We don't just want to innovate in the industrial sector. The agricultural sector also has a vital role to play. As stewards of the land, our farmers belong on the front lines of the climate fight. And together with the United Arab Emirates, I'm proud to announce the launch of Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate, AIM for Climate. This is something we first proposed at my Leaders Summit on Climate. Over the last 6 months, we've worked with more than 75 partners to catalyze public and private investment in climate-smart agriculture and food system innovation. Today, along with 75 partners, we're going to launch a $4 billion initial investment globally. The United States is planning to mobilize $1 billion of that $4 billion over the next 5 years, and I invite all of you to join us in working to double the investment by the time we meet at COP27. As with every aspect of the climate crisis, no one can do this alone. We need all of us working together. I know you're tired of hearing that said. It's said over and over and over again, but it's true. And as we do, the United States will lead by example and share with the world our considerable powers of innovation. And as my grandfather would say, with the grace of God, the goodwill of neighbors, and the creek not rise, and we're going to make a lot of progress. All kidding aside, I think there's virtually nothing we're unable to do, particularly when we do it together. And again, I want to thank all the private sector for their work. Thank you.
Thank you, President Biden, for telling us more about the First Movers Coalition and AIM for Climate Initiative. Next, we will hear from President Kenyatta of Kenya. Please take your place at the right lectern.
Thank you, and let me begin by saying what a great pleasure it is to participate in this leaders' event on accelerating clean energy, technology, innovation, and deployment. And I believe that this event provides us all with a unique opportunity to accelerate innovation and the deployment of clean energy solutions to meet the goals that we set out in Paris. Kenya recognizes the value and the interconnectedness between energy, climate change, and people, and the critical role of achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as well as the Paris Agreement on climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, demand for energy is on the rise, and there are 759 million people in the world who today have no access to electricity, while 3 billion people do not have access to clean cooking fuels and technologies. At the same time, the energy sector accounts for 3/4 of greenhouse gas emissions, and the critical challenge, therefore, is how to reduce carbon emissions from the energy sector while ensuring that all people have access to clean energy. We therefore need urgently to develop new clean energy technologies that meet the energy demand without exacerbating greenhouse gas emissions. We in Kenya have made significant progress in advancing access to affordable and clean energy for all. And in this regard, we have increased access to electricity from below 30% in 2013 to over 75% in 2020. We have installed the biggest wind power plant in sub-Saharan Africa and are steadily exploiting and deploying available geothermal potential, currently estimated at some 10,000 megawatts, to help us push our green agenda. In these developments, Kenya has demonstrated that it is possible to achieve ambitious development goals while remaining green. Renewable energy in Kenya currently accounts for 73% of all our installed power generation capacity, and while 90% of the electricity that we use is from clean sources. We are on course to achieve our goal, our target of 100% use of clean energy by 2030, and to achieve a 100% access in clean cooking by 2028. In the framework Thank you. In the framework of the high-level dialogue on energy that was held in September of this year, Kenya continues to play the role of a global theme champion on energy access with a specific focus on clean cooking. And to demonstrate our commitment, Kenya did submit an energy compact on clean cooking, indicating clear actions towards achieving universal adoption and use of clean cooking solutions, advancing the achievements of SDG 7, which is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. We appreciate that low-carbon energy technologies offer more sustainable ways to meet energy demand to fuel economies while simultaneously reducing greenhouse gases. However, access to and deployment of these technologies remains a persistent barrier. Nonetheless, Kenya's long and medium-term policies underpin a pathway to sustainable and resilient economic growth characterized by clean and healthy environment. Countries must therefore invest more in research and innovation, including addressing challenges of technology transfer to accelerate innovations and deployment of technologies in the energy sector. Further, there is need to promote public-private partnerships and collaboration through creative efforts to foster international partnerships, information sharing, and indeed establish novel financing schemes. We in Kenya reaffirm our commitment and resolve to work with others to accelerate climate solutions, keep to 1.5 degrees, and to ensure solutions are accessible and indeed affordable for all. We join the world today in launching the Breakthrough Agenda and say that Kenya is committed to working together with all countries to accelerate the development and deployment of clean technologies and sustainable solutions. Specifically, we endorse the proposed Glasgow breakthroughs pertaining to power and green hydrogen in the energy sector and look forward to transitioning and eventually exiting from the use of coal to clean power. Further, as a commitment to fight against climate change, part of Kenya's long-term strategy that is being finalized, and depending on levels of international support, as well as the principles of equity and fairness, we project to meet net zero target by 2050. We urge all parties to step up their ambition in making clean technologies the most affordable, accessible, and attractive option in their social, economic, and development interventions. I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, President Kenyatta. We will now hear from President von der Leyen of the European Commission at the left lectern.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, fellow leaders, I welcome and endorse the World Leaders Summit statement on the breakthrough agenda. And the European Union is proud to support all 4 breakthroughs on power, road transport, steel, and hydrogen. I am especially glad that on this COP26, finally, we prioritize the importance of innovation, because it's only through innovation that we're going to get to our goal of net zero. And therefore, scientists and innovators, entrepreneurs and investors, that's whom we have to bring together. They are central for the innovation. They are central to move towards an economy that gives more to the planet than it takes away. For Europe, the European Green Deal is the driving force behind scaling up innovation. It's the Commission and the Member States' governments that, of course, must provide legal frameworks and funding for cutting-edge technologies, such as direct air captures or zero-emission shipping. And of course, it's the private sector that we have to bring along too, to invest to scale up the technologies that are already at the horizon, like renewable hydrogen or precision and carbon farming. It's reform and regulation and investment that we have to bring together, public and private. But we should not forget the third driving force behind all of this. And these are our citizens. These are people who are asking us to deliver, to finally bring together all the things that are necessary, that we move up to a true circular economy. And we know that we all have to transform our way of living, our way of working, as well as our way of producing and consuming. That's only possible through innovation, and only through innovation will we be able to take our people along. Investment, one hand, concrete action on the other hand. Horizon Europe, the world's largest publicly funded multinational research and innovation program, is worth 85 billion euros. Horizon Europe will devote at least 35% of its budget to climate objectives. And to be very concrete, just last month, we launched new Horizon missions. One is to have 100 climate-neutral cities in Europe by 2030. And I'm very glad that we see finally the revival of mission innovation. Mission innovation is the striving example of global engagement. All governments pool their investments in clean energy research and innovation. It's over 95% of total government investment that we have finally in mission innovation. And it's good that it's back on the scene. We need it, and it's good that we have it now. In our new global mission on climate-neutral smart cities, we will work together with Global Covenant of Mayors. All this, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, all this is concrete action on the ground. And in this context, I'm also very pleased to launch today, together with Bill Gates and the European Investment Bank, the EU Catalyst Programme. It is worth 1 billion euros. It's a program that will finance industry's innovation, breakthrough innovation, to bring the newest climate technologies to the market in Europe. Immediately after this session, Bill and I will launch this new initiative. Fellow leaders, ladies and gentlemen, my friends, it is innovation that leads the way. It is what citizens want of us, and we will not disappoint them. The global race for net zero is on, and there is no better race to win. Thank you.
Thank you, President von der Leyen. It's really exciting to hear about the European Commission's leadership on innovation, including through mission innovation and now the new EU Catalyst program. I'm now delighted to invite Prime Minister Akhnouch of Morocco to speak on my right.
Permettez-moi tout d'abord de remercier le Royaume-Uni, président de la COP26, d'avoir invité le Royaume du Maroc à ce sommet mondial des leaders. Je suis particulièrement ravi de nous voir y aborder le thème de l'innovation, du déploiement de la technologie propre qui se trouve au cœur des préoccupations, de nos préoccupations communes. Le nouveau modèle de développement auquel aspire le Maroc a fixé 5 paris d'avenir à relever dans les domaines stratégiques. Parmi eux figurent ceux de la recherche, innovation et de l'énergie. L'engagement du Maroc dans une dynamique de transition énergétique est un choix politique volontariste porté au plus haut sommet de l'État par Sa Majesté le Roi Mohammed VI, que Dieu l'assiste. C'est un processus amorcé il y a plus d'une décennie à travers une stratégie énergétique ambitieuse basée essentiellement sur la montée en puissance des énergies renouvelables, efficacité énergique et intégration régionale. L'ensemble orienté vers l'innovation adaptée et le contenu local. Actuellement, 50 projets d'énergie renouvelable cumulant une puissance installée de 3 950 MW sont déjà en service. En outre, plus de 60 autres projets sont en cours de développement ou de mise en œuvre. Dans la continuité de ces efforts en vue d'accélérer la transition énergétique, plusieurs mesures sont entreprises pour développer la biomasse énergie, les énergies marines et l'hydrogène. En matière d'innovation, le Maroc s'est doté d'infrastructures de recherche et d'innovation de pointe de la technologie dans le domaine des énergies propres, et ce, afin d'accompagner cette transition énergétique. Dans ce cadre, un réseau de plateformes de recherche d'innovation a été mis en place. Il s'agit en particulier du Green Energy Park, qui est une plateforme de recherche et d'innovation dans le domaine de technologie, ou du Green and Smart Building Park, plateforme dédiée à l'efficacité énergétique dans les bâtiments, les smart grids et la mobilité électrique. D'autres plateformes sont en cours de développement portant sur l'hydrogène, la biomasse, le Nexus Agro Energy Water ainsi que le dessalement. Des grands efforts sont également déployés pour faciliter le financement de ces projets, et ce en encourageant une forte participation du secteur privé national et international. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le Royaume du Maroc a emprunté la voie d'un développement basé sur le développement des technologies propres, sur la promotion de la recherche et innovation verte, et continuera à déployer ses efforts dans cette direction. Afin de conclure, je souhaite féliciter et remercier tous ceux et celles qui sont derrière cette initiative visant à garder l'objectif de 1,5% atteignable, et vous assurer du soutien du Maroc à la déclaration globale de Glasgow et au lancement des percées relatives à l'énergie et à l'hydrogène. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister Akhnouch. Finally, we will turn to President Geingob of Namibia, who I invite to speak at the left lectern to give our final leader remarks.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to tell you a little bit about what Namibia is doing to accelerate the deployment of clean technology on our shores and foster innovative approaches in line with the agenda we have gathered here to endorse. This coming decade must be a decade of action. We are running out of time. Namibia is a victim of climate change, yet it is uniquely equipped to play a vital role in crafting the needed solutions and availing the resources needed to make an impactful difference. We traveled here to announce our unequivocal support for the progressive and collaborative action required to save our planet and preserve our way of life. We have just designed, floated, and are about to award the latest tender in our nation's history in a record time, satisfying our acceptance that there is no more scope for business as usual in these dire times. We are calling for the urgent construction of green hydrogen assets in Namibia to manufacture the critical electrons and molecules needed to decarbonize our energy system. The request for proposal floated advocated for speed and urgency, challenging developers to state their emotions in terms of the scale of electrolysis development within a short period of time. In keeping with our endearment for the environment, we rewarded developers for illustrating how this would be done in harmony with the flora and fauna of the national park we have. In other words, we championed policy and supporting legislation that accelerated the development of clean technology and looked to foster innovative approaches to sustainably decarbonize Namibia and the broader global energy landscape. The resulting proposals received estimated the number of potential jobs to be in excess of 30,000, more than double the region's existing levels of employment. More profoundly, they also paid homage to the people of that region and advocated for the formation of a regional development fund over and above the requirement to contribute to Namibia's soon-to-be launched sovereign wealth fund. This sort of public-private sector collaboration captures the essence of a just and equitable energy transition. To ensure that we captured as much of the value chain as possible for our citizens, we have established a national green hydrogen research institute, which will inculcate the latest cutting-edge technologies into the classrooms and syllabi of our tertiary institutions. Institutions. We come here to announce our support for the Glasgow breakthrough because we appreciate that the partnership are an essential component to successfully lift the heavy burden. Namibia has always been a child of international solidarity. We remain true to these characteristics. We also affectionately as a land of the brave. Never before has that name been more relevant. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm saying one Namibia, one nation, one Africa, one continent, one world, one universe. With that, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Gengab. And thank you to all of the world leaders on the panel. You're now welcome to return to your seats via the stairs on my right before we kick off the next segment. Thank you very much. It's probably the safest. Thank you. It's clear that countries across the globe are already making significant progress in advancing breakthroughs in power, road, transport, steel, hydrogen, and agriculture. This is not the end of the story, but the start. Powerful coalitions between governments, civil society, and businesses are how we will be needed this decade. Let's now turn to some of the people delivering this change on the ground. Our next segment will spotlight those on the front lines of the clean energy transition, who are leading the charge globally to find innovative solutions on the path to repairing our planet. We are delighted to be joined today by the co-founder of the Earthshot Prize, His Royal Highness, the Duke of Cambridge, and the Earthshot Prize finalists. The Earthshot Prize is a global environment prize framed around optimism, not pessimism, to drive change and collective action over the next decade. Let's hear more from them.
How many people over the years have looked at the moon and longed to visit?
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Let's take inspiration and set ourselves a global
You and the Secretariat brave such odds to present the sense of urgency on the need to accelerate our commitment to the Paris Agreement. The latest IPCC report shows that 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming is likely to occur, and Eswatini and the entire Southern African region is warming at twice the global rate. We are already experiencing extreme weather events, which include heat waves, floods, and droughts, resulting in huge economic losses. We are still reeling from the effects of El Nino drought scourge, as well as the recent cyclone Ilos, worsening the level of vulnerability for the people of Eswatini. Our recovery is already compromised in light of the prevalence of COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. President, warnings are clear that such occurrences are yet to increase in frequency and in intensity. This should be, to all of us, a clear call for raising ambition and fast-tracking climate action. Developing countries, including African nations, are ready to transform their economies to be low carbon and climate resilience. However, without the much needed adequate, predictable, and accessible financial support, this remains an impossible task. We therefore emphasize the importance of the delivery of support for developing countries, especially through the fulfillment of the developed country commitment of jointly mobilizing $100 billion per year by 2020. The urgency of agreeing on a post-2025 finance regime that is in line with adaptation gap report cannot be overemphasized. Mr. President, Eswatini fully supports the effective implementation of the Paris Agreement, despite contributing as little as 0.007% of the global emissions. We have submitted an enhanced and ambitious NTC focusing on all sectors. We look forward to a global pathway towards the net zero emission in order to keep within the targeted 1.5 degrees Celsius objective. In so doing, we plead that we keep to all the universal values, in particular the UN Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 principle of leaving no one behind, and include the Republic of China, Taiwan in these matters. We pledge our support to you, and my delegation is committed to participating in all deliberations to ensure a successful outcome of this conference, including the completion of the rules governing the implementation of the Paris Agreement. I thank you, Mr. President. May God Almighty bless us all.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Michael Martin, Prime Minister of Ireland. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
President, Excellencies, this is an important meeting for all of the world's people. We come here as leaders, and it is vital that we offer the leadership the world now urgently needs. Climate change is real. We are seeing its serious impacts already. The IPCC report in August confirmed to us that it is widespread, it is rapid, and it is intensifying. The scale of this change is unprecedented. But as the report made clear, it is not too late. Human actions still have the potential to determine the future course of climate, the very future of our planet. To achieve our Paris goals, immediate large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions are essential. Unless we act now, we will not keep the possibility of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees alive. The scientists are playing their part in helping us to understand the dynamics of climate change and in developing the technologies and responses we need to limit its effect. As political leaders, it is our responsibility to put the necessary policies in place. Ireland is ready to play its part. We have enacted legislation to put a legally binding target of reducing our emissions by 2030 to 51% below 2018 levels. We will reach climate neutrality by 2050. We are working closely with our European Union partners in the green transition that will make Europe the first climate neutral continent. We're implementing a statutory system of carbon budgeting and emissions ceilings for each sector of our economy. We are working at the United Nations Security Council to put the destabilising impacts of climate change firmly on the agenda. We do not believe or accept, as some would have it, that it is too late, that the transition will be too costly, that it is inevitable that we will leave people behind, that someone else should shoulder the load. We believe in the immense capacity of humans to work together and to achieve great things. If we act decisively now, we will offer humanity the most valuable prize of all, a livable planet. We can achieve a cooler world, a biodiverse world, a world with healthier air for us to breathe, healthier soil for things to grow in. A world in which people can live more sustainable lives, handing a healing and enriched planet to future generations. We can create a world in which human impact on all parts of our ecosphere, the land, the sea, the air, is brought back into balance. Those of us in the developed world, those who have frankly contributed most to the problems that confront us, all have an obligation to support those who are most acutely challenged by their consequences. Ireland accepts that obligation, and in support of achieving the 100 billion target, I'm therefore pleased to announce today that Ireland will more than double its contribution to developing countries so that we are delivering at least 225 million a year by 2025. As leaders, if we are to bring people with us on this journey of a lifetime, we must also recognise and respect the real anxiety that many people feel when confronted by such an enormous challenge. Our young people worry that there will be no worthwhile future for them to inherit. Workers worry that their jobs will disappear, leaving them without a livelihood. Consumers already feeling the impact of energy price rises feel that the transition will be too costly for them to bear. In response, I say, I will do everything in my power, working with all of the leaders here today to make sure that that is not so. To ensure that we will succeed in limiting emissions. To ensure that the transition we deliver is jobs-rich and economically sustainable. To ensure that there is real climate justice and nobody in any part of the world is left behind. The IPCC report makes it clear that every tonne of carbon warms the world. Every second of delay makes our task that bit bigger. Let us leave Glasgow with a renewed commitment to doing what we know needs to be done. Let us move forward together now. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Andrei Blenkovic, Prime Minister of Croatia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, Mr. President, climate challenge is the greatest challenge of our lifetime and this century. Even with the most decisive action now, it will still irrevocably worsen lives of generations to come. Resolute and urgent action now can, however, significantly reduce this decline. As leaders, not only as concerned individuals, it is upon us to enact and implement policies, choices to do so. At a minimum, we must achieve the goals of the climate agreements we have already concluded and act more vigorously in their fulfillment. This is key to narrow the ever-increasing gap in areas where we are already off track. We must also be more ambitious. This is a necessity, achievable only if we act together. Joint action is possible only with the engagement of businesses and industries, valuable contribution of the civil society, and the overall support of our citizens. Their proper understanding of effects of climate change through raising awareness and education is crucial for winning this battle. Ladies and gentlemen, Croatia takes nature protection seriously. We have the fourth lowest carbon footprint per capita in the European Union. Croatia's forestry has centuries-long tradition of sustainable management. With 93% of certified forests, our CO2 absorption rate per capita is twice the EU average. Our Plitvice Lakes National Park are in the top 5 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, ranked by the size of the net carbon sink. Altogether, 38% of our land is under protection, with 2 strict reserves, 8 national parks and 12 nature parks. We are a country blessed with immense biodiversity. To show our continued dedication, I wish to lay out a few of our commitments. Croatia will participate with, for us, highly aspiring 45% in the EU's ambitious goal of 55% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2030. Our coal phase-out year is 2033, but we will push to do it even earlier. With its 2030 target for renewables amounting to just above 39% in final consumption, Croatia surpasses Europe's goal of 32%. We aim to have more than 65% of renewables and 100% low carbon in final production. Croatia sees clean mobility and innovative technologies as an opportunity, all the more so that one of the world's leading companies for the development of e-mobility and self-driving vehicles, Rimac Automobili, comes from Croatia. As a country of 1,000 islands, Croatia intends to contribute to the global goal of ocean protection by having 30% of sea within national jurisdiction under protection. As a highly popular tourist destination, Croatia intends to compensate the impact of tourists on CO2 emissions by planting more than 1 million additional trees annually by 2030. We are enhancing resilience and increasing our aerial firefighting capabilities by establishing a regional center in Zadar, Dalmatia. Its active capabilities will be to benefit of the Mediterranean climatological hotspot, in the vein of what we provided this summer to fight fires in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Greece and Turkey. Ladies and gentlemen, we must all bear our share of responsibility. Fighting climate change requires challenging adaptation and enormous efforts by economies and societies worldwide. The cost of not doing so will be immeasurably greater. We can act willingly or end up being forced to act. Any delay will make the process infinitely more painful. Let us work together to attain our common objectives through the United Nations framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Highness Sheikh Sabah Khaled Al Hamad Al Sabah, Prime Minister of Kuwait. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. معالي السيد بوريس جونسون رئيس وزراء المملكة المتحدة، معالي السيد أنطونيو غوتيريش الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسرني في البداية أن أنقل لكم تحيات سيدي حضرة صاحب السمو الشيخ نواف الأحمد الجابر الصباح أمير دولة الكويت حفظه الله ورعاه، وتمنياته لكم بالتوفيق والنجاح في مؤتمر الأطراف السادس والعشرين. أصحاب الفخامة والسمو والمعالي، إن ظاهرة تغير المناخ وعد إحدى التحديات الخطيرة التي باتت تواجه المجتمع الدولي في عصرنا هذا، وأصبحت مكافحتها أولوية لكل دول العالم انطلاقا من شعورها بالمسؤولية الجماعية، حيث أضحت أبعادها السلبية تشكل تهديدا ليس للبيئة فقط إنما لكافة مناحي الحياة الأخرى، منها السياسية والاقتصادية والاجتماعية، ثم يتطلب منا جميعا تضافر الجهود لمواجهتها والحد من آثارها والعمل سويا من أجل تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة وأهداف اتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية لتغير المناخ وتنفيذ اتفاق باريس. أن دولة الكويت وامتثالا منها لبنود اتفاق باريس للمناخ قامت بتحديث وثيقة مساهماتها المحددة وطنيا في 12 من أكتوبر 2021، حيث تساهم دولة الكويت بحزمة من المشاريع التنموية مبنية على رؤية من شأنها تجنب ازدياد غازات الدفيئة بما يعادل 7.4% من إجمالي انبعاثاتها حتى عام 2035، حيث تم إقرار خطط وبرامج التنمية المستدامة على المستوى الوطني من أجل الانتقال إلى نظام اقتصادي منخفض الانبعاثات من الكربون المكافئ بناء على توقعات انبعاثاتها المستقبلية في أنماط العمل المعتادة للفترة ما بين 2015 إلى 2035، حيث تولي دولة الكويت اهتماما كبيرا بتنويع مصادر إنتاج الطاقة في البلاد من خلال إدخال الطاقات المتجددة واستبدال الوقود الأحفوري بالغاز المسال بضمان استدامة إمدادات الطاقة للأجيال القادمة. وقد قطعنا شوطا كبيرا وبشكل طوعي ومدروس وبحسب الإمكانات المتاحة لنا لإعادة تأهيل منشآتنا النفطية والصناعية والتوجه إلى مصافي تكرير النفط الحديثة لإنتاج الوقود البيئي النظيف. السيدات والسادة، تسعى دولة الكويت لتبني استراتيجية وطنية خفيضة الكربون حتى عام 2050 مبنية على مبادئ الاقتصاد الدائري للكربون والعمل على تعزيز الحد والتخلص وإعادة الاستخدام وإعادة تدوير غازات الدفيئة، بالإضافة إلى سن التشريعات والقوانين ذات العلاقة بالحد من الانبعاثات والتكيف مع آثارها السلبية على المستوى الوطني، وذلك تمشيا مع الالتزامات البيئية المحلية والإقليمية والدولية. كما أولت الدولة اهتماما كبيرا بزيادة المحميات الطبيعية لتصل إلى ما يزيد عن 15% من إجمالي مساحة الدولة، بالإضافة إلى زراعة نباتات المانجروف في السواحل والجزر الشمالية من دولة الكويت بهدف حجز وتخزين الكربون. أن دولة الكويت شاركت بفعالية في برنامج آلية التنمية النظيفة ضمن بروتوكول كيوتو، ونتطلع للمشاركة في آليات المادة السادسة ضمن اتفاق باريس للمناخ المتعلقة بالآليات السوقية وقوانين السوقية والتعاون المشترك لتعزيز التنمية المستدامة والسلامة البيئية، والتي نأمل إقرار مبادئها التوجيهية في هذا المؤتمر، على أن تكون المنهجيات والمبادئ التوجيهية متماشية مع متطلبات الدول النامية وتساهم في تنفيذ مساهماتها الوطنية المستقبلية بما يحقق أهدافها للتنمية المستدامة. إن لدولة الكويت إسهامات مميزة إقليميا ودوليا للحفاظ على البيئة والموارد الطبيعية في العالم، فقد قام الصندوق الكويتي للتنمية الاقتصادية العربية بتخفيف التداعيات البيئية الناجمة عن انحسار بحر آرال الواقع في آسيا الوسطى وبحيرة كورلي في جمهورية غانا والحد من الإشعاعات الناجمة عن انفجار مفاعل تشيرنوبل والتي امتدت آثارها إلى جميع مناطق العالم ومنها دولة الكويت. ومؤخرا ساهم صندوق التنمية الكويتي من بين الجهود الإقليمية والدولية لتنفيذ مشروع للحد من ظاهرة الغبار والعواصف الرملية والأتربة العابرة للحدود بين دولة الكويت وجمهورية العراق بهدف تخفيض ما يقارب 40% من فرص حدوثها الأمر الذي تعاني منه دول الإقليم كافة ومنها دولة الكويت. شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Kosi Anatano, Prime Minister of Tuvalu. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We are gathered here at the beginning of COP26, a COP marked by clear evidence of the increasingly dire impacts of climate change and a pandemic that has demonstrated the interconnected nature of our global community. What we do at home reverberates around the world, reminding us of our shared responsibility to address climate change. Tuvalu wishes to reaffirm the urgency of the climate change crisis facing Pacific states, despite our negligible contribution to global emissions. We urge world leaders to similarly affirm the critical urgency of the climate crisis. This is the single greatest threat to Pacific livelihoods. Mr. President, we must conclude negotiation on the Paris Rulebook and safeguard the integrity of the Paris Agreement. We must urgently call on major emitters to take stronger climate action. However, we must also realize that these steps may not help countries like Tuvalu that are irreversibly affected by climate change. For Tuvalu, we must fast-track large-scale climate finance that are easy to access for bold, long-term and permanent adaptation solutions. Mr. President, whatever our progress in combating climate change, there will likely be countries who cannot adapt, and we will see significant loss and damage, even at safer temperature levels. Given this, we must immediately develop new financing mechanisms and funding windows for loss and damage. We must preserve our statehood and sovereignty and develop legal mechanisms to recognize our maritime boundaries as permanent despite the impact of sea level rise. In the midst of COP26, we signed an agreement with the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda to establish a commission of small island states on climate change and international law. The commission is obliged to request advisory opinions from the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea on the legal responsibility of states for carbon emissions, marine pollution, and rising sea levels. We must support initiatives of this nature to develop and implement fair and just global and environmental norms and practices. For atoll nations, the ravages of sea level rise are now unalterable, and emission restrictions will no longer help us. For Tuvalu, we urgently require the means to build raised reclamation land to save ourselves. We must take bold, alternative actions today to secure tomorrow. Mr. President, even if all greenhouse gas emissions cease tomorrow, Tuvalu and other low-lying atoll nations are sinking. Right now, 40% of the central district of Tuvalu's capital, Funafuri, is already below sea level at highest tide measures. We acknowledge plans by countries, but for Tuvalu, our existence has already been threatened, and it is already too late for Tuvalu and SIDS. We cannot wait for 10 years or for another year. Enough has been said. We must take action now to save and secure our future. Before I leave COP26, I was honored to be given this scarf. Just yesterday, a gift from the Aboriginal women of Australia. It displays the color of global warming with a strong message to stay safe in the blue areas. And I wear it today for them and our people in Tuvalu. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Philip Davis, Prime Minister of Bahamas. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, this past summer at the Olympic Games, a young Bahamian woman and a young Bahamian man outran the competition to become gold medal winners in their 400-meter races. Our runners had the discipline and drive to work towards long-term goals. Our runners had the courage and determination to overcome every obstacle. And our runners had the ambition to believe, yes, they would succeed despite the odds. Colleagues, we must do the same to ensure that this gathering succeeds in a way that the prior 25 such meetings did not. We in the Bahamas will do what we can, but the limits of our nation's effort can accomplish our task. We cannot outrun your carbon emissions. We cannot outrun the hurricanes, which are growing more powerful. And we cannot outrun rising sea levels as our islands disappear beneath the seas. Hurricane Dorian, that monster Category 5 hurricane, which devastated 2 of our main islands, feels like it descended upon us just yesterday. We still don't know exactly how many died, and some people still tremble at the first drop of rain. But every day, our yesterday is already becoming your todays, and fast becoming all of our tomorrows. But today we can still do something. As I said to the General Assembly of the United Nations in September, you will only be safe when we are all safe. We are out of time, colleagues. A recent study declared that the Bahamas had the cleanest air in the world. Other studies have shown that our distinctive, beautiful aquamarine seas are a magnificent carbon sink. Our seas reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. The Bahamas is not now and never has been the problem, but yet we are forced to pay the price. We are among the top 10 most vulnerable islands, nation-states in the world. And the question I have for my colleagues today is, are we brave enough for this moment? Are we braver than our predecessors who led our nations at the previous 25 climate change meetings? Can we summon the courage and ingenuity and determination to succeed where they did not? Promises and agreements are easy. Action, specific concrete policy changes, is a lot harder. Action requires courage. Every leader before us has postponed until tomorrow what needed to happen yesterday. And now tomorrow is here today, and countries like mine are out of time. Your support by financing and technology transfer are needed urgently so we can rebuild for resilience. Without change, if we are lucky, we will become refugees. Without change, if we are unlucky, then we will be left to the mercy of future Hurricane Dorians. More of my people will die. More will be left traumatized and homeless. People will be forced to flee, but flee to where? These are my neighbors, my family, and friends. My plea is both urgent and deeply personal, and I make it on behalf of all humanity. My friends, look outside. Our hurricanes are your fires and floods. Our hurricanes are your landslides and drought. Morally and ethically, it has to be beyond imagination and conscience that we do so little until it becomes too late. Please, do what is needed, not what you can get away with. Turn promises and agreements into action. Don't hide behind buzzwords and hazy assurances. Don't let the failures of the past limit our ambition for the present. Have the courage to acknowledge that failure today will lead directly to destruction for humanity tomorrow. Like Bahamian gold medal winners, today we still have the chance to win the race against time and outrun the impact of climate change. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Carlos Agostinho do Rosário, Prime Minister of Mozambique. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Senhor Presidente da COP26, Excelências, é com elevada honra que, em nome de Sua Excelência Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, Presidente de Moçambique, nos dirigimos à comunidade internacional neste debate da COP26. Reafirmamos o compromisso de Moçambique em trabalhar coletivamente na definição de ações concretas, eficazes e realistas que nos permitam abordar as mudanças climáticas de forma holística. Moçambique está na rota dos eventos climatéricos extremos que se registram de forma cíclica e cada vez mais frequente e com maior intensidade, tais como ciclones, cheias, inundações e secas. A título de exemplo, Moçambique foi afetado em 2019 e 2020 por 5 ciclones, sendo os ciclones de Idai e Kenneth os mais devastadores. Dada a frequência e intensidade com que os eventos climatéricos temos no nosso país, a nossa abordagem está centrada na prevenção, adaptação, mitigação, ressentimento da população virada para o desenvolvimento, construção de infraestruturas resilientes, assim como gestão de recursos hídricos, conforme o plasmado na contribuição nacionalmente determinada NDC atualizada. Moçambique sozinho, tal como outros países em desenvolvimento, não conseguirá ter recursos necessários para financiar ações estruturantes para fazer face aos impactos das mudanças climatéricas. Por isso, apelamos à mobilização de mais recursos, à suavização de critérios de acesso aos mesmos e transferência de tecnologias. Excelências, constitui prioridade de Moçambique a implementação de um programa de transição energética assente numa matriz diversificada, com fontes mais limpas e amigas do ambiente, que estão em consonância com os programas de desenvolvimento do nosso país. Contudo, Moçambique defende uma transição energética para energias mais limpas e amigas do ambiente, que seja gradual, faseada, de modo a minimizar o impacto do processo de desenvolvimento do nosso país. É neste contexto que Moçambique se propõe utilizar o gás natural como energia de transição para fontes mais limpas. Excelências, Moçambique está determinada a continuar a envidar esforços para atingir, em 2030, níveis de 102% de contribuição de energias renováveis na matriz energética nacional, no âmbito do alcance dos Objetivos de Desenvolvimento Sustentável. Contudo, reconhecemos que o alcance destes níveis é um grande desafio para Moçambique, porque pressupõe fontes de financiamento e tecnologias adequadas, devidamente asseguradas, para facilitar a massificação do uso das energias limpas. Por isso, convidamos a todos para se juntar aos esforços de Moçambique na mobilização de recursos e tecnologias necessários para a implementação de um programa de transição energética que inclui fontes mais limpas e amigas do ambiente, sem, contudo, comprometer o processo de desenvolvimento socioeconômico do nosso país. Excelências, Moçambique tem estado a apostar nas oportunidades do mercado voluntário de carbono para promover a gestão sustentável das florestas. Por isso, Moçambique apoia a declaração sobre florestas e o uso do tempo. Excelências, Moçambique, ao candidatar-se a membro não permanente do Conselho de Segurança das Nações Unidas para o período de 2023-2024, quer acrescentar a sua voz na agenda sobre mudanças climáticas. Moçambique apoia a candidatura do Egito para acolher o COP26-27 em 2022. Termino convidado a todas as partes a assumirem o compromisso de proteger o sistema climático do mundo. Muito obrigado.
System of our planet. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Stefan Lanev, Prime Minister of Bulgaria. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to address the COP26 and allow me to use that opportunity to express my gratitude to Her Majesty government for organizing this event in extremely difficult times of global pandemic. Needless to say that the last IPCC report contains scientific evidence that the more frequent extreme weather events we are witnessing across the planet are a clear sign that the planetary warming is accelerating. It is already affecting our many aspects of lives, economies, and ecosystems. Our presence here today means that we realize how important it is to work together and that more credible actions are needed by all countries and by every one of us to limit the temperature rising. In this context, Bulgaria is completely determined to fulfill its commitment to the Paris Agreement. Along with the other European Union member states, Bulgaria will work for reaching the goal of climate neutrality by 2050 and for the more ambitious goal of 55% of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is enshrined in EU legislation. At a national level, we have developed an entirely new set of measures in our recovery and resilience plan. It will become a new roadmap for decarbonization of the Bulgarian industry and for reaching economical growth within a sustainable and preserved environment, which includes phasing out of coal use by 2038-2040. Our efforts are focused on the three main goals: accelerated further development of renewable energy sources and hydrogen, increase of the energy efficiency of the economy, and sustainable mobility. All the measures that will lead to the green transition are carried out in the economic reality of today, the reality of an unprecedented pandemic and rising energy prices. Our main concern is the risk of job losses and the energy security of our country, as we believe that only a performing and a vital economy can be transformed. Therefore, the national future should be taken into account for a fair and proportionate approach. Bulgaria supports the united efforts of governments, private sectors, academia, and other stakeholders in our common goal to fight climate change. No country alone is able to face the global threat to climate change, because we don't have the option of or luxury of failure. Let us join our effort to reach a new consensus among all countries on the necessary climate actions and goals to achieve global climate neutrality by mid-century, as well as to agree on decisive short and medium-term policies based on the right balance between mitigation and adaptation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Robert Abella, Prime Minister of Malta. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests. Climate change is real, and it is happening now. And it is having devastating impacts. This means that we need to work quickly and effectively to mitigate these impacts. And as world leaders, we are here because we recognize that it's our responsibility to find and implement solutions. Ones that give our children hope for a better future, and the serenity of mind that we are committed to walk the talk with real global collaboration. We must believe that together we can make the difference for our children, our families, our peoples, and above all, for humanity and our planet. This is why COP26 is a turning point for mankind. This is it. To start with, we need to make the Paris Agreement work, ensuring it remains our uniting force to combat this reality, to foster a spirit of cooperation and solidarity that recognizes that the whole is much stronger and more impactful than the individual parts. We must also all be committed to play our part. For climate change knows no borders. Its implications are universal, but its impacts are local, and its consequences have a disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable. Fundamental principles must therefore be adhered to in our fight against climate change. Our commitment to convene here in Glasgow must be translated into active and, I dare say, passionate commitment to undertake meaningful and impactful actions. And as the world slowly recovers from the pandemic, the lessons we learned must not be ignored, and the slogan "Building Back Better" cannot just remain a rhetorical expression. We must effect real change and convincingly ensure a just transition that leaves no one behind in a compelling and tangible manner based on digitalization, talent, and a revision of how we measure national value and wealth. At the same time, we must reinforce our ambitions for collaboration and solidarity. The prosperity of one country should not translate into the isolation of another. The planet's new future should be based on the alignment of nations in their right for a better world, a world without disparity. If we aim for success in mitigating the ravages of climate change and building our resilience, we must also recognize the differentiated impact of climate change, especially upon the most vulnerable. The truth is that we all have a part to play in mitigating the climate impacts and addressing adaptational capacities. Malta will not be passive. Our commitment is to implement a low-carbon development strategy with ambitious 2030 targets that will lead us to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. For a small country of just over 300 square kilometers, with limited natural resources and very limited capacity for emissions reductions, these targets are very challenging. But Malta was the country that brought climate change to the attention of the United Nations General Assembly in 1988, and we want to live up to that legacy. Also, because we understand the threat that climate change poses to small island states that are increasingly being battered by climatic extremes, from rising sea levels to devastating storms, from drought to sudden precipitations, from import dependency to intermittent isolation caused by heavy storms. Small island states are currently in grave danger, and we all have a duty to ensure that no coastal state loses any of its rights due to climate change. This is why Malta is committed to offer its assistance to small island developing states. We share similar risks, we live common circumstances, and because sharing experiences and transferring knowledge are key components of climate action, we wish to share with small island developing states our experiences and our lessons learned for a fair and successful decarbonized economy. On a concluding note, transformation, infrastructure, and adaptation capabilities need financing. It must therefore be ensured that funds are channeled to where they are most needed. Recognizing that developing countries are facing major challenges, Malta is committing to immediately double its contribution to the Green Climate Fund as of now. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to make one final appeal. Let's rise to the occasion. Together, we will defeat this global existential threat to give our children what they truly deserve, a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Edouard Negrente, Prime Minister of Rwanda. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my great pleasure to represent His Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, at COP26. I would like to express my appreciation to the United Kingdom for hosting this summit and to the government and people of Scotland for your warm hospitality. We are falling short of our duty to both people and the planet if we don't urgently address climate change. To cut temperatures to below 1.5 degrees, a 45% reduction of emission is required. This calls for immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Excellencies, in Rwanda, we have seen firsthand the impact of climate change. Floods, droughts, and landslides have damaged livelihoods and property and tragical cost to many lives. That is why Rwanda is committed to reducing emissions by 38% in the next decade and reach net zero by 2050. Rwanda looks forward to working with partner states and institutions to ensure our mitigation and adaptation plans can effectively be effectively implemented and make impactful contribution to global efforts. I take this opportunity to thank every country that has ratified the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol and encourage all remaining parties to do so. If implemented fully, the amendment could avoid to 0.4 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. It is also time for us to come together to realize the potential of the Paris Agreement. Let us keep the 1.5 alive, scale up timely and ambitious actions, mobilize finance, and complete the Paris rulebook so that there are
no more delays to climate actions. Rwanda pledges its full support for inclusive and transparent negotiations and for collaboration and dialogue between partners around the world. I thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is now my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Jose Ulises de Pina Correa y Silva, Prime Minister of Cabo Verde. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Cabo Verde é um país africano e um pequeno Estado insular em desenvolvimento. Nesta dupla condição, nós somos um país com elevadas vulnerabilidades económicas e ambientais e forte exposição a choques externos. Convergente com a posição do Grupo Africano e da Oasis, defendemos cortes ambiciosos nas emissões para evitar o aumento da temperatura média global para nem de 1,25 graus centígrados até ao final do século. Políticas públicas e investimentos em empoderamento tecnológico para adaptação às alterações climáticas, transição justa e aumento da resiliência, concretização do financiamento climático e criação de condições para sua execuibilidade e acesso, consideração das vulnerabilidades e especificidades dos CIDs nos critérios de financiamento climático. Sr. Presidente, Cabo Verde assumiu compromissos e faz questão de cumpri-los. As nossas NDC estão atualizadas e aprovadas com compromissos de reduzir as emissões em 38% até 2030 e atingir a neutralidade carbónica em 2050. Partindo dos atuais 20%, pretendemos em 2030 ter mais de 50% de penetração de energias renováveis, acompanhado do aumento da eficiência energética. Cabo Verde foi o primeiro país africano a aderir à Aliança para a Descarbonização dos Transportes. Até 2030, devemos substituir 25% da nossa frota de veículos térmicos por veículos elétricos e atingir 100% em 2050. Para viabilizar a agricultura, estamos a investir forte na desalinização da água salobra e do mar, de utilização segura de águas residuais tratadas, massificação da rega gota a gota associadas às energias renováveis. Estes são os esforços de um pequeno Estado insular que tem uma contribuição significante na carbonização da economia, mas que sofre fortemente os efeitos das alterações climáticas. Todos os CIDs sofrem do mesmo. Estão fortemente ameaçados pelas alterações climáticas. Os desafios das mudanças climáticas exigem compromissos coletivos e ação. Exigem muito mais do grupo restrito de países do G20, que podem fazer diferença com eficácia. As Pope Francis said, it's time to act and to act together. Por último, é preciso erradicar a pobreza. A pobreza extrema que afeta milhões de pessoas no mundo, porque ela não facilita a massificação de práticas e atitudes a favor do clima e a favor do ambiente. Muito obrigado. Thank you.
To contribute to the degradation of the climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure now to welcome His Eminence, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Secretary of State of the Holy See. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of reading an excerpt of the message of Pope Francis addressed to the President of this conference. We can achieve the goals set by the Paris Agreement only if we act in a coordinated and responsible way. Those goals are ambitious and they cannot longer be deferred. Today, it is up to you to take the necessary decisions. We are facing an epochal change that calls for commitment on the part of all, particularly those countries possessed of greater means. These countries need to take a leading role. For its part, the Holy See has adopted a strategy of net zero emissions operating on two levels. First, the commitment of Vatican City State to achieve this goal by 2050. And second, the commitment of the Holy See to promote education in integral ecology, to favor a cultural model of development and of sustainability centered on fraternity and on the covenant between human beings and the natural environment. Along these same lines, on 4 October last, I joined a number of religious leaders and scientists in signing a joint appeal in view of COP26. What clearly emerged was a remarkable convergence on the urgent need for a change of direction, a decisive resolve to pass from the throw-away culture prevalent in our society to a culture of care for our common home and its inhabitants now and in the future. Humanity possesses the wherewithal to effect this change. Special care must likewise be shown for the most vulnerable peoples, in whose regard there is a growing ecological debt related to commercial imbalances with environmental repercussions and to the disproportionate use of the natural resources of one's own and of other countries. The ecological debt raises in some ways the issue of foreign debt, the burden of which often hinders the development of peoples. We can and must restart from a consideration of all these aspects, along with the setting in place of carefully negotiated procedures for forgiving foreign debt, linked to a more sustainable and just economic restructuring aimed at meeting the climate emergency. Sadly, we must acknowledge how far we remain from achieving the goals set for tackling climate change. This cannot continue. There is no time to waste. All too many of our brothers and sisters are suffering from this climate crisis. Now it is time to act urgently, courageously, and responsibly. I accompany you with my prayers as you take this important decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Excellencies, friends, it is of course a pleasure to be Thank you, Your Eminence, for the message from the Holy Father. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, it's a pleasure to be with you today as we close now the World Leaders Summit. And over the past 2 days, leaders have been clear. This COP must deliver our shared goal of pursuing efforts to keep 1.5 degrees within reach, including through the negotiations. And we have made progress. The Paris Agreement is working. We are bending the emissions curve downwards. We are becoming more resilient to climate change. And we've heard some good announcements on mitigation, adaptation, and finance over the past 2 days. But positive though all this is, we know that it is not enough. Over these 2 days, we've heard that clearly from very many leaders, a chasm still remains between the words and the actions. And we've heard clearly about the stark reality that many face. Yesterday, Prime Minister Mottley of Barbados told us, and I quote, 1.5 is what we need to survive. 2 degrees is a death sentence. And so we have less than a decade left to keep our shared goals, the goals of the Paris Agreement, within reach and limit the rise in global temperatures to well below 2 degrees, pursuing efforts to 1.5. And yesterday, His Excellency Carlos Alvarado Quesada of Costa Rica told us that he'd explained his departure to Glasgow to his very concerned 8-year-old. And he said to his son, I have to go because we need to fix this. And we all know that he's right. The events over the coming days will continue to drive action. But the fate of the Paris Agreement rests on whether or not we can agree how to accelerate progress to 2030. And so our negotiated outcome must launch a decade of ever-increasing ambition and action, or we will put our Paris goals in serious jeopardy. Over these 2 days, leaders have made clear why such an outcome is needed. And ministers expressed in principle support at the pre-COP in Milan and the London ministerial that I convened in July. And we've heard different proposals. But the time for proposals and agreement in principle has passed. Now is the time for decision, for consensus. So I ask all world leaders to make clear to your ministers and negotiators that you expect this COP to produce resolution. And please tell them to come with a currency of compromise to these negotiations. And tell them that in 2 weeks' time, when Glasgow is behind us, we will all want to be able to look our people in the eye and be able to say that we played our part in keeping 1.5 alive. And success depends on all of us, but particularly our leaders. A crisis of such gravity and urgency requires direction from the top. Let's be frank, the history books will not relay the names of the officials stuck in the negotiating rooms. They will tell of world leaders and the course that they set at this critical juncture. So it is up to you, to world leaders, to ensure that the power of your words on this stage translates into actions and decisions from your ministers and negotiators. The world is watching, and it's time to deliver. This brings us to the end of our national statements in this plenary for today. Distinguished heads of state and government, the opening of the second part of the high-level segment will be held on Tuesday, the 9th of November at 10 a.m. in this plenary. With that, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP and the CMA adjourned.
you.